Hello, I'm David Petrayko from the Nautical Institute, and welcome to our webinar. There are still a number of people joining, so I'll just briefly introduce our guest, Mr. Anjaney Borwankar, who's in Barcelona, and I'm in London. We're both safe and social distancing from each other. So Anjan is the co-founder and chief strategist of the Singapore-based Navozyme, and he will be our primary presenter today. So just a brief word about the format. The webinar will last about an hour, including some Q&A towards the end. As we go through, please feel free to submit your questions. You can do that by clicking on the control panel, which you can maximize and minimize, by clicking on the white arrow in the orange box. And there'll be a tab down there for questions, and you just type in your question, and I'll see it pop up on my screen. You can do that anytime during the presentation, but we won't take the questions until the Q&A. So that's the housekeeping out of the way. How are we doing? Still got a few people going. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Nautical Institute, and I hope most of you are, we are the global body for maritime professionals. And a professional body is an organization that helps its members and even non-members with lifelong learning. The world is moving very fast, or sometimes even slows down a little bit, but we all have to keep learning. And we try to do that. We do it through a bunch of different tools. We have books, we have magazines, we run events, we do short courses, we do anything we can to help people learn. And we listen to our members, and it's their expertise that help us develop those best practices for learning. We're often associated with navigation. We do a lot of work with navigation safety. And in the past, some people have said to me, why blockchain? Are we going to use that for navigation? Well, the fact is that the Nautical Institute believes that professionals, maritime professionals, are not just safe, but they have to be efficient and effective. Because you can have the safest ship in the world, but if it can't make money, and it can't integrate with the world, you're not going to have a business. So it's safety, it's commercial efficiency and effectiveness. Now, we hear a lot about blockchain in the news, and a lot of people are interested. What is it? Is it going to affect me? How is it going to affect me? And quite interesting, we had over 500 registered participants for this webinar. So there are a lot of people with questions wanting to know a little bit more. So that got us talking to our friends Navozyme and Anjan, how we could address this. So we've come up with a range of different options for helping you understand blockchain and how it affects you, which Anjan will explain in his presentation. So what is blockchain? Where are the opportunities? And how can maritime professionals prepare themselves for an environment of blockchain? So what I'm going to do now, before I formally introduce Anjan, is I'm just going to hand him my control. And he can load up his presentation. So Anjan is a mariner. He is the co-founder and chief strategist for Navozyme, which is a Singapore-based company, and that company is focused on enhancing the lives of maritime stakeholders via the use of innovative technologies. He has been the lead on strategic projects in the Philippines, Singapore, and Spain, and as you can imagine, he has top-level educational qualifications, and he's a jolly nice guy too. So Anjan, over to you. Please educate us.
Thank you so much, David, firstly, for the very generous introduction, and also to the Nautical Institute for having me in this webinar. Can you see my screen already? with the slides, David? Okay, fantastic. So before I begin, what I'd like to do is actually show a photo. Let me switch my screen because I'm seeing something different. Okay. So what I'm going to show you is a photo of not a hospital, for those who are not familiar with the maritime industry, or, this looks like a quarantine zone on a ship, but this is actually what is happening on board ships right now. It's a photo sent by an ex-colleague, a friend, on a recent visit to Barcelona on his ship. And as you can see, the life of the seafarers, this is the port entry happening in the port of Barcelona in the evening on a container ship. And it's not easy. The challenging times are not there just for us, but even more so for the seafarers. So I'd like to begin by first recognizing these unsung heroes, these invisible heroes who are our seafarers, right? They're still working out there. Many of them can't go back to their families because of all the travel restrictions. And also they are helping us move the goods all around, which give us the quality of life we have today. So a big salute out to them. Let's not forget that. Let's also acknowledge the context we are in today, which is a challenging one. Now, moving on, I don't want to make this a sad story about how bad life is today with the virus, etc. I'm going to try and be positive because I see a lot of opportunities, and you will see that blockchain and other technologies provide really a very bright future for all of us. So let me introduce who I am very quickly. David has already touched upon a bit of my background. I like to call myself a seafarer, entrepreneur, educator, and also a student. So today I've been invited as an expert on this topic, but I see myself as someone who knows what is unknown, in the sense that I don't have all the answers. So if your questions, there are some that I can't answer, I'll just be upfront and say I'll study that and get back to you. But this is a topic of great interest for me, and I am a student. I've been lucky to have worked and been educated in some of the world's prestigious organizations. And my current positions are with Navozyme as its co-founder. This is my principal role. But I also have roles with in voluntary capacity with the Digital Economy Committee of Eurochamp Singapore, where we teach with where we learn and we discuss issues across industries on the topic of digitization. And then I've been also involved in teaching roles before, and also in venture formations. So that gives a little bit of my background, but I think I've been invited here for a completely different reason, because of my expertise in leading some global maritime implementations of blockchain, and also because I was part of a team that helped set up the first course for maritime professionals on the topic of blockchain. So with this, I'd like to first highlight, what is my personal motivation in this. Bear with me a second, please, because, okay. So you should be seeing the slides which says, why does Navozyme exist? And though this topic is on technology, I want to highlight that the motivation for our company comes from the problems that I have personally faced as seafarers and what we have seen in the maritime industry. So we are here to enhance the lives of people, and technology is an enabler. And then in the maritime industry, safety, productivity, reputation are key factors. So we use these as metrics for us to move forward. Okay, so the key point here is that the technology doesn't come first. It's the issues around human beings that come first, and that is the motivating bit for all of us here at Navozyme. Now, to make that more concrete, here is a picture taken in Manila of seafarers waiting for their paperwork. And this is just a partial view of the entire story, but you get the point. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands of people waiting in queues and doing bureaucratic tasks to get on board a ship. So can technology help better lives is not just a theoretical question. What we are working towards is making sure that they, by sitting in their home with a few taps on their mobile, receive all the documentation they need so that they can go on board a ship, and the story continues. So I just wanted to bring this picture right up front, because what we're going to talk about is about real issues using technology, using blockchain. When I get into the parts on blockchain, it may get very abstract, right? It may get very digital, but I always want to bring you back to the human aspects of this. Okay, so we have been raising awareness about blockchain because when we started doing our work in Navozyme in 2017, there was a lot of confusion about this word blockchain. And often it was correlated directly with Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and the lot. So we had to re-educate ourselves on how to explain to decision makers what are the advantages of this technology. Now we've come a long way. Last year we conducted a 2-day workshop for our IMO members, and this is the Navozyme team that was there, along with also the Nautical Institute's team. And we felt grateful to be able to influence this raising of awareness on this topic. And then it has also led to a university course at the Singapore Management University. And the photo you see is actually the first cohort of that, which graduated last year. So we've come a long way, and some of the material I'm going to use today is based on the interactions and the learning of having delivered these workshops. So what are we going to do today? Okay, there are basically 3 topics. What is blockchain? But we also have to talk about what is not blockchain, because there's a lot of myth around that. Second, we'll be talking about applications of blockchain in the maritime world. We often hear of blockchain in fintech and in many other industries, but I want to first give the message that it's not like blockchain is yet to come. It's actually already here. And you may not be hearing much about that, and we can discuss why that is the case. But we are going to talk about applications. And then finally, all this is great, but how does it impact you as a seafarer, as a maritime professional, as someone who will be affected by technology, whether blockchain or something else? Earlier, I was looking at the list of all the registrations, the 500 plus people who have taken out time to be here and learn. There are a lot of questions around what does it mean for you. So we're going to touch that topic quite deeply as well today. Okay. So as David said, I'm going to speak for about 40 minutes or so and leave about 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. Okay. So let's begin. Now, the story of blockchain, the genesis of blockchain, actually begins with another crisis. And this is the financial crisis in 2009. This is a photo of the Times of UK. And it says Chancellor on the brink of the second bailout for banks. So looks like I'm having a very grim kind of presentation so far, but you'll see the light very soon. Now, back in 2009, Bitcoin was also formed. And there's actually a reference by its creator. We don't know whether it's an individual, it's even a human being, but there is this creator called Satoshi, who basically puts a message in the first Bitcoin block, which says the Times 03 Jan 2009 Chancellor on the brink of bailout for crisis. So why am I telling you all this, and why is it relevant? It's relevant not because we need to know about the crisis, etc., but we need to know that the genesis of Bitcoin, and I'm using the word Bitcoin blockchain intermittently and interchangeably right now, and that's okay for now, but we'll change that later. So the motivation here was basically because there was a trust deficiency with traditional centralized systems. The central banks, for example, could not be trusted. There was a lot of frustration about these bailouts, etc. So Bitcoin was created in 2009, not by chance, But basically, to resolve this issue once and for all of having decentralized system, moving power from a central point across different networks. And Bitcoin was a money transfer, or rather is a money transfer mechanism, which is basically borderless. Okay. So we have to remember here that the motivation to create Bitcoin was this trust deficiency. And we'll see this word trust coming up many times. It's probably the most important point you need to know if you want to understand blockchain. So let's look further. What a blockchain is. So if I put it in my own language, it's a software with some special features which allows you to distribute data and ensure that there's a lot of trust in that. When you, again, sorry about this, my slides are shifting. Okay. So you should be still seeing the right slide. Okay. So what you see here is that trust, or rather digital trust, is a combination of a few words: distributed, immutable, transparent. And these are big, heavy, loaded words at the moment. Okay, we shall unravel them in the course of this presentation. So bear with me, but I want you to know that basically trust has now, for the first time in human history, been encapsulated in a digital form, which means it makes any transaction much, much easier. Okay, when I am repeating the word, it's any transaction, not just business transactions, also social transaction. Any transaction that we do as human beings is on the basis of trust. So imagine if you can now digitize this trust. This is the power of blockchain. So let's understand this a little bit better. Okay, this is still very conceptual. So blockchains are also called distributed ledger technologies, which we'll see a little bit more later on. But what is this ledger and what is this distributed ledger technology? So imagine a ledger is nothing but a record, okay? A bookkeeping record. In this picture, you see a ledger, a physical ledger, and there are lots of records. There are a lot of data entries there. There's that one central ledger, the big ledger in the picture. And now imagine if you had a means by which whatever was being recorded in that ledger automatically goes into every other ledger that is there in the public space. So let's say you give access to a lot of people to look at this ledger, and immediately, automatically, by magic, you get the same information accurately in all these other places. What happens? Basically, the control, the centralized control, the centralized power that you need to refer to this one big book to understand and to ensure that the data is accurate is gone. So suddenly, the distributed nature of this ledger makes very interesting things happen. And this is the fundamental basis of blockchain or distributed ledger technologies. Okay. So what did Bitcoin do? And I must now at this point also highlight that blockchain is not a new technology as people think. So in 2009, it's not like by magic, this guy just invented it exactly when the financial crisis was needed. This technology is actually accumulation of many other bits and pieces, like peer-to-peer database sharing, cryptography, which is more than 1,000 years old, etc. We don't have time to get into all those aspects. In the course that we lead, we actually get into a lot of details on those points. But suffice to know that this is not a new technology, but there was something new that Bitcoin solved. And what Bitcoin solved is called the double spend problem. So the moment you make a digital ledger, that means a record that is now available in many places at the same time, we have a challenge, because imagine if you gave some money to somebody else digitally. How do you know that that same money has not gone to another person? That means, how do you not double spend, right? So again, we will not get into how this double spend problem is resolved, but what I should make you appreciate is Bitcoin basically helps solve this problem. And it did this using this technology called mining and consensus, etc., which are again big words. We will not get into that right now, but it's good that you hear these terms. Okay, so bear with me. It's still very theoretical, but we want to understand the nitty-gritties of blockchain before we see its application in the maritime industry. And this slide, I took my time because it's important. So now, to understand the power behind blockchain, we must appreciate what is distributed. And the word distributed and decentralized is often loosely interchanged, which is not very accurate. So I want you to understand what this is. So here are three drawings: a centralized system, decentralized, and distributed. Now, if you see the red dot on the centralized system and the red dots on the decentralized system, if these dots are non-existent, or they disappear, or they fail, all the other dots surrounding those basically also disappear. Now, if you see that for a distributed system, that's not the case. You can choose any dot you like and then make that disappear, and you'll see there'll always be a connection with some other point in the network. Now, this is very powerful because what it shows is that there is no centralized dependency. And this kind of structure is actually what makes the blockchain very resilient. Resilient means that it's very difficult to bring down, it's very difficult to fail, right? Now, resilient distributed networks are actually very common in nature, but we as human beings have only used them in sporadic cases. I'll pause a second and think about distributed systems in nature that you can think of, examples of this. Okay, perhaps you may have seen an ant colony. So ants are often quoted in distributed systems when they want to cross a bridge of water, let's say with water below it. They can climb on top of one another, and there's no real leader there. That's an example of a distributed system. Today's crisis, one of the reasons here is because we don't know which is there is no central virus there, the virus leader that we can eliminate, and then the rest of it goes. So virus is again a distributed mechanism. You know, our brain is structured in that way. In technology, you have the internet as well. Okay, but do not confuse decentralized with distributed. Now, companies like Google, Facebook, etc., they may have many headquarters and regional headquarters, but at the end, there is still a decentralized control mechanism. That means there are some people who will control what goes in those areas, right? So decentralized is not to be confused with distributed. And the main point I'm trying to make here is the power of blockchain, a lot of it comes because of the distributed nature of its design. So this is the key learning here. Now we have to learn a bit more, and the next 2 or 3 slides will get slightly technical. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible, but we have to look inside a block to know what it is. And what is a block? A block is nothing but a space, a virtual container, which contains some information. So let's look at the actual Genesis block, or the first block that was mined. And you can see here in the part that I have highlighted that there's a timestamp. That's the only thing that a human being can really properly understand. All the rest of it looks like garbled bits of numbers and letters, right? Now, those garbled bits of numbers and letters are actually quite important, and they're called hashes. And we will see in a little bit more detail what is a hash, but the hash is an important component of a block and subsequently of a blockchain. So we will have to bear with this technical jargon a little bit longer, but I'll try to make it very easy and simple through this demo that we look at. So don't worry about the rest of the structure of this Genesis block at the moment. Let's go to the next slide. And here, what we see is the hash. We'll look at the hash in a little bit more detail. Okay, so what is hash? It's you put in some data, any information. Could be your name, it could be address, it could be a book, it could be a library of books, any data. Okay, that can be put into a function. Function is like a machine that converts the data into this garbled text, which we call the hash. Okay, so The hash here in this thing is these letters of characters, etc. Okay, we can't really decipher them. Don't worry about that for the moment. I'm going to actually start this animation, and you will see that this is a demo where the moment we are typing in some letter on top, the hash at the bottom, the red space at the bottom, actually is changing, and it's changing completely randomly. So observe these following things, that when the input, that means the text on the top, changes even by a slight bit, the hash at the bottom completely changes, and it changes quite dramatically. It's difficult to predict what that outcome is going to be from the input. This is very important. Observe another thing, that the length of the hash is actually fixed. It does not increase, even though the input is increasing. So that is another characteristic of the hash function. And then, as I said before, it's difficult to guess what the hash or the input of that hash is. Okay. So what is this hash? To understand this simplistically, we can just say that it's a unique digital fingerprint of the data. So now what is interesting is I can put in any data, and I can even put in hash as the input to get another hash. Remember this. Okay. So we've looked at the hash, and those of you who had trouble following this, remember that we'll have a recording later, so you can go and play around with this a little bit more. But the key thing here is the data gets converted into something which is letters and numbers, which can't be deciphered by a human being. Okay. And now let's go back to understanding what a blockchain is. And again, this will be one of the final slides where you'll be troubled by the technical bits, and we'll get into the applications very soon. But to understand what a blockchain is, what we did is we took data and we basically encrypted that. Okay, we just saw how that is done using the hashing function. Now remember, in this diagram, it can be a certificate, it can be any other piece of information. Data is anything that you want to put in. Okay, it could be parameters of a ship, it could be signatures from a person, etc., etc. So anything can be data. Now this data is put in this container, which we call the block, right? And let's call this block N. So it's just stored in the block. And now this is the key part. So what happens now? This block N gets hashed with some new data. Okay, let's say you change the information on the certificate in this example, and basically you hash it again. And that's how you get this new block, which is N plus 1. I'll pause for a second, and then I'll simplify this further for you. Okay, so what we actually did was we created what is called immutability by putting the hash of the previous block in the subsequent block. Let's watch this again. So the hash of the Genesis block 0, goes in block 1. The hash of block 1 goes in block 2, and so on and so forth. So basically, what we have is a chain now of blocks which are what we call cryptographically connected. So if I look at each of these blocks, what happens is as the number of blocks increases, the chain gets more and more secure. Now, why does it get more secure? It gets more secure because to change the last block, I have to find the hash of the previous block and the block before that and the block before that, and so on and so forth. And to find the hash is also not easy in the first place. So basically, this is what a block is. This is what a blockchain is, and this is how they are linked together. This is what increases the security and the immutability of the blockchain. Okay, in our actual course, we do a lot of games to understand this concept, which is difficult to replicate on the webinar. If you didn't follow everything, don't worry. What you have to just understand is that it's like these Russian dolls, that the last block has contained within it the information of the previous block and its previous block, etc. Okay. So now we can improve our knowledge of blockchain. And so far, we have been talking about Bitcoin as blockchain. But now let's increase our understanding. So blockchains are a much bigger group of applications, and Bitcoin is one of those applications of a blockchain. But blockchain is also contained within what I referred to earlier as digital ledger technologies. So you can have a distributed ledger using some technology, and not every one of that needs to be a blockchain. That means not everyone needs to be cryptographically connected via this system that I just showed you. Okay, so bear that in mind. So next time you're reading about blockchains, try and see if you understand what are they exactly talking about. Are they talking about Bitcoin or blockchain or DLT or something else? Because in the popular media, there's a lot of confusion on this, which causes, again, further confusion amongst the readers. So there are different types of blockchains, and this is also important. There's not just one blockchain as such. So Bitcoin, we already know. And the characteristic of this is it's got a function to transfer money, digital currency, and it is open to anyone. So anyone can join the chain and transfer funds from one place to the other without revealing their identity. It's a public blockchain. Another example of a public blockchain is Ethereum, okay, which has many other characteristics. But you also have other types of blockchains, Hyperledger, Corda. Corda is actually a DLT, but these are not open to the public, Hyperledger, Corda. You need permission to enter this chain. So it's only for those who have identified themselves. The trust has already been established in other ways. And the list is endless. Actually, there are more than a few hundred different blockchains, or correctly put, blockchain protocols available today. And each one is for a particular use case. So here you see IOTA, IOTA, that is for Internet of Things. Usually it works better if you're doing some Internet of Things related data transfer. Okay, we won't get into that, but I just want you to basically understand that there are many types of blockchains. They're open, closed, public, private, etc., etc. What you normally will see in a business is a closed or private or permissioned blockchain. You're not likely to see a Bitcoin application in the maritime world, or an open system, unless it's a hybrid with a closed system. So basically, this is one of the reasons why we don't hear a lot about blockchain. Not because it's not here already, but because I don't necessarily need to share my own information or my group's information with the whole world, right? That's not how we do business. So this development, so Hyperledger Fabric, which is what we use in Navozyme, basically was established in 2017 approximately. Okay, so remember 2009 Bitcoin, 2017 Hyperledger. So a lot has happened since the origins of the development of blockchain through Bitcoin. So we must bear that in mind. So next time you're reading anything on this topic, ask yourself, what is the writer actually talking about? Because sometimes if it's confusing, it's because the writer itself is not clear on this topic. So be careful, okay? Okay, now we've done with the technical bits, okay? So you can take a sigh of relief. And if you've actually got everything, then congratulate yourself. If it's been a little too basic for you because you're already an advanced user, then we can discuss some questions offline also later. But what are the key takeaways, at least in understanding what is blockchain? Number one, that its motivation was there because trust was failing through centralized systems, okay? And this relates to blockchain technology helping us reduce the cost of trust. So if it's not centralized, it also affects business in many ways. You can bring down the cost of your transaction You can eliminate certain middlemen. If you are yourself one of those middlemen, then you want to re-question and revisit your own value that you bring. Are there other places that you can add a lot of value? Blockchain can protect data better. I'm not suggesting that it's to be used in every occasion, but it can definitely protect your data better. And we saw how that is done using this cryptographic immutability through the chain. But they're also more resilient. This is, I think, a big plus of the blockchain. It's very difficult to bring down that information, right? So today, when we were doing our research for the IMO presentation last year, we saw that most of the fraudulent documents that were reported were not because the person could not check the certificate number by going on the let's say the classification society's website, but it was because that website was hacked in the first place, right? So now, if you had a decentralized, or rather okay, see, I'm catching you if you're paying attention, because if I use the word decentralized, it's wrong in this context. It should be distributed, right? So if we have a distributed system, it's very important that to understand it's very difficult to bring that down. So it's very difficult to hack it. So if you shared this sign that the certificate is authentic on a distributed network, that problem could be resolved. Okay, so it allows you to protect data better. And not all blockchains are the same. Okay, we saw the different types. Now, what I'm going to show you is that also maritime industry has many areas that fit well for blockchain application. And we'll see how in a bit more detail now. Okay, so I have a few minutes to get into that. So let's go into blockchain applications. So what I have listed here, as you can see, are different use cases. My research team has actually come up with more than 500 use cases in maritime world right now. And some of the obvious ones are logistics, supply chain, you have insurance, you have bill of lading, et cetera, et cetera. And I've just shown you some of the key players in those applications, right? Now, each of these, for example, CargoX, actually is a consortium. They use a particular kind of protocol, and they have a number of other organizations who work together as part of this chain, okay, which is often not seen easily. TradeLens, and I recommend this to everyone, actually has a very good website, and it is one of the leaders in the electronic bill of lading. There were some questions on that, so those who are not familiar with TradeLens should definitely take a look. Now, I'm going to speak from my own experience, so we'll shift back to Navozyme for a second. And what Navozyme does is we work in 3 areas around maritime certifications, which are connected with the human element and ship operations. So we're working on use cases in the Philippines on seafarer certifications, in Singapore on ship registry, and in Spain on port clearance. So basically what the idea here is, there are lots of stakeholders who need to exchange information with one another. This today is expensive, cumbersome, and also leads to fraudulent activities. Can there be a way by which the source of the information is connected to the blockchain, and whoever needs permission to access that information gets that permission? By that, we bring down efficiencies. We boost efficiencies, and we bring down all the problems. Okay, so let's dive deeper into the ship registration example. So Navozyme leads this consortium, which we call the Blockchain Registry Alliance for Vessels, BRAV. And it's composed of Maersk Drilling, American Bureau of Shipping, MPA, and also the Danish Maritime Authority has joined as an observer recently. So basically what we do here is, there's the traditional registration process, which involves different stakeholders that you can see on top, the owner, register, shipbuilder, etc. And lots of different documents and checks need to be in place before the ship registry can happen, right? So it's a complex process, a lot of manual checks going on, back and forth of documents. These are some of the issues. And what the blockchain system enables you to do is basically eliminate some of this and exchange information in real time amongst permission parties. So this information is not for the public, You won't see information about this, just by going to Bitcoin or something like that. But it does bring in a lot of efficiency, and this is why the consortium approach is important. So we have actually done a ship registry process for MPA already on this in the piloting phase, and it will also allow buying and selling of ships, etc. Okay, and then we are exporting this also to other classification societies and registries. So basically, what it does in terms of business impact benefits is a lot of productivity gains, cost, time savings, faster approvals, etc. But more importantly, reducing risk, enabling compliance, and now in this post-COVID world, also reducing physical contact. You don't need to go physically to meet somebody for a signature and stamp, etc., etc. So that's basically how the application of blockchain in this one specific use case. Like I said, we are also working in other areas, whether it's single maritime window for port clearances or for basically the seafarers, having their documents, all their ship certificates, etc., on their phone and not having to go to any place physically, to get approvals, right? So we've been doing work in the Philippines on that with a lot of our very nice partners there, which again, we can discuss that later if interested. So now, if you're not in any of these areas, you'll say, okay, but blockchain is not important for me. I'm in LNG or I'm in bunkering or some other thing, right? So let's see, how do you evaluate, the blockchain's value? So there are 4 areas that we propose that you can start with, and these are called provenance, places where you need a notarization, with certificates related stuff. Value transfer, value can be money, but it can be information, it can be your credibility, it can be something else. And streamlining is, again, basically creating efficiencies by removing the middleman, right? So if you ask yourself these questions or look at these points, right? For example, in notarization, is there a lot of documentation that you have to deal with? Do you have to deal with stamps, seals, signatures? Is there critical information in this certificate? If you get that information wrong or it's fraudulent, it can cause an accident, right? Things like that. These could be your starting points. If you're checking many of these points, then perhaps blockchain has some value for you in your business. Okay, we'll get more specific in a second. I'm going to close in a few minutes by talking about what it means for you. Okay, so far we've seen what is blockchain. We've looked a little bit at its applications. And now the most important part. So what does this all mean for you as a maritime professional? Okay, now, first thing I want you to do is, basically look at these 4 questions and see whether blockchain would be relevant for you. So are you dealing with multiple untrusted parties? Are you sharing information with them? Is the information critical? That means if you get it wrong, basically somebody could die, or you could have an oil spill, etc. Right? Is the process that you're doing, checking a document, etc., repeated often? Things like that, right? So if the answer is yes to some of them, then perhaps blockchain is relevant, right? So that's the first starting point. So this will affect you, okay? Now, more importantly, are you ready for this so-called new normal, right? It's a reality. I haven't moved out of my house for the last 50 plus days, okay? Initially because I was not allowed to, and later probably because I realized, hey, sometimes there's no need to go out there, okay? So how do you add value? What business are you in? How will this lessened human to human physical interaction affect you? How do you get this digital analog balance in your life? Like, these sound like philosophical questions, but they actually have a lot of impact for you. And now as business leaders, I think you need to ask these questions also. Are you a digital leader? Because you need to be one, especially in the post-COVID world. And what advantages have been created? Not disadvantages, advantages as a result of these new technologies and the change that is coming, right? And are you prepared? Is your organization prepared? So basically, we as Navozyme, and here is where we collaborate with the Nautical Institute, is we help the seafarers, we help the maritime professionals to equip themselves with this change, to prepare themselves. And that's why we've got a course that we designed, an online course, a 3-day course, which looks at many of these topics that we discussed in this webinar in great detail. And more importantly, we see how to apply that in the context of your own business, right? And then we also look at some other technologies which are connected with blockchain, because blockchain by itself will not solve everything. You need many other things as well. So we look at the larger digital transformation umbrella. So we can talk more about this if people are interested, but the inaugural program is actually starting soon. And we're going to open for registrations after this webinar. The first inaugural class will be a small class, so we want to keep it highly interactive, and we'll talk about more details just after this. So with that, I'd just like to close by saying thank you, firstly to the Nautical Institute, and then to all my listeners here. And I hope this has clarified some of your doubts about blockchain, and you see that blockchain is actually already here. It's not something of the future. And my last suggestion is, how can you use the time to prepare yourself for this new exciting future? Technology is an enabler. It can do us good, but we are the ones who need to basically harness that and apply it. So with that, I'll stop. My contacts are here. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect that way, and you can send me also questions via my email. So thank you. And with this, I'm going to basically ask David to take the controls back.
Yeah. Anjan, just before I take the controls back, if you, excuse me, if you leave your screen up there for just a little while so that if anybody wants to make note of your details. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but this recording will be made available afterwards, so you can listen to it again. And Anjan did mention about a course. We do have a course that is delivered now online. And if you would like some more information about that, there's a handout that you can see on your control panel, and you can download a document that gives you a bit more information. So that being said, questions are pouring in, Anjay. So, and I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. But you mentioned in the beginning that blockchain was born out of a crisis, and we see ourselves yet in another crisis. So what do you think the implications will be for both blockchain and the way we work in maritime following this crisis? It's a big question, I know, sorry.
Yeah, it's a very relevant question, very good question. And I've been thinking about this for some time, because we as a young company, we have to know whether we are going to be relevant, in the times to come. And the good news for us, and I think for many people in the maritime industry, is that our lives will become simplified. And if we embrace technology in the right way, it can actually help us in many ways. So I'll tell you a very concrete thing, without disclosing too much details at this stage, because the project is still not public. But like I mentioned, we are running a pilot on port clearance here in Spain. And there are, again, a lot of documents which require physical handover to different parties, signatures, stamp seals. So when Spain was hit very badly, I would say, with the COVID virus, the port authorities still had to continue work. And many of them in the subsequent discussions we had were saying, if the system was already available, it would be so good, right? So what I'm trying to say here is, certain things that we take for granted as the norm need not be necessarily. Do you really need to be there physically to wait in a queue and get something stamped? No, right? So all these things, so our life will become easier. That's what I mean, right? Your documentation will become easier. The flip side of this is, if we do not embrace technology, or if we are kind of hesitant to learn, or we feel even scared, by this change, which is a very normal reaction, then we may be left behind. I think fear comes from the unknown, right? You don't usually fear what you already know. But the unknown brings you opportunities. This is the dilemma here, right? So I would strongly suggest, that embrace this, join the learning journey. Do not be left out, whatever age you're at, whatever. I have had to learn a lot of new things. Okay, I'm 40, late 40s. I won't disclose my age, but I've had to learn a lot of new things and get myself re-educated several times, and that's okay. And we may not have all the answers, but I think we have to be optimistic of the future, because wasting our time on unnecessary things that technology can do doesn't help us improve our lives. Okay, so I'll stop with that, but perhaps there are other questions.
Oh, Anjan, my screen's going crazy here. They're pouring in. But here's one. How does it make the life of a ship's master and officers easier and or safer? And will it require extra training for seafarers?
Right, it's a great question. So I think I showed, not in great detail, but through the example of the seafarer certifications and that photo of lots of people waiting in a line to get their documents assessed. That will be something historic, right? So even before you go on board a ship, your life should get better thanks to this technology. That's one. Second is, in this port clearance process, the master has to put in a lot of information, which is often delegated to the second officer, right? A lot of paperwork. Now, I've been last on board a ship, with some responsibility 2 decades back, but not much has changed in terms of the paperwork. Only it has increased. So now what we're designing is a system by which you just click the button saying, which port are you arriving in next? You fill in things like ETA and stuff like that, or any other, but your normal documentation and your normal information that you have to repeat in so many forms now gets automatically filled in directly from the source. So the classification society is able to tell the port state control inspector what is the bilge tank capacity for his waste collection, so he doesn't have to put that information on the form and make an error and get fined later on, stuff like that, right? So simple nitty-gritties, but this is how basically the life of a seafarer, an officer, a master, will be eased. And we really, that's why I showed my motivation earlier. My motivation here is to impact people's lives, not to create new hurdles. And blockchain is an invisible technology, so it's not about learning about a new software or it just works at the back, just like the internet. We do not need to know how it functions, but we know how to use it, right? So the same thing. So those of you didn't understand how the hash works and what is the chain, don't worry. Understand that this will increase trust. Understand that it's a very reliable system, and think of ways in which you can start embracing that, right? That's the key message here.
Okay, thanks, Anjan. Let's see. Oh gosh, so many questions. There's one from Roy Emmanuel. I've seen a lot of pros with blockchain application in maritime industry. However, what do you think are the cons?
Yes, that's true. I have a bias for pushing the pros, but the cons are there. And the cons are the following. So I mentioned that blockchain is not one animal, right? You have so many different protocols. So you have different types of blockchain. So now imagine TradeLens builds its blockchain using Hyperledger Fabric, which it does, okay? And then CargoX builds its blockchain using Ethereum, which is a different programming language, let's say, okay? Now, how are they going to interchange information with one another? So are we creating silos, which just are more sophisticated? So this was one of the things. So this is called interoperability. Big word. How does information exchange itself between two blockchains? The good news now is, so when we started in 2017, our company, this was a very unresolved question and a very important one. But today I can tell you with a lot of confidence that there's a lot of work already put in by some of the technical giants in the world to resolve this issue. So actually, different protocols can start talking to one another. So though it is a drawback, it has been addressed, right? So that's one, but it's still some work to go there. Second drawback is actually a human drawback, not a technological drawback. So if we don't have an understanding of what this technology does, remember I told you we always fear the unknown. That's our natural reaction. Blockchain is confused with Bitcoin, with cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are very risky right now. They fluctuate. So we look at blockchain as being risky. Now that's an error in judgment, because blockchain actually increases safety, reduces your risk. But Bitcoin can be very risky. The two things are separate. Often we mix them in our conversation as though it's the same thing. We have to be careful with things like that. This is why raising awareness about what blockchain does and understanding a little bit the intricacies, the nitty-gritties, is important for people who are in the industry, right? That's why we also designed this course, jointly with NI.
Okay, thanks, Anjan. Like I said, the questions are flooding in, but here's one. By Robert, are you aware of any intentions to integrate blockchain into the implementation of the cybersecurity code?
Yes, that's a good question. So yes, I am aware that there is already work happening at the IMO level. In fact, in 2019, October, when we gave the session and we talked with many of the leaders at IMO, the topic that they were very interested in was cybersecurity and how blockchain can be actually implemented within that. Right now, the challenge here is the awareness of how blockchain is to be implemented at such a large scale. Firstly, there are not that many people with experience, and there are not that many applications yet. This is the fact. So this is also one of the drawbacks. Because it's such a new technology, other than Bitcoin, which is out there, for everyone to know, the business applications are there, but they're not known. They're not widely publicized. So yes, there is work going on, but when it will come, I think it's still perhaps a few years away, because it will take consensus from many people before it can be as the norm. Having said that, I just want to add one thing on the e-certificate. So many people have this question that if I have my phone with my certificate on the blockchain, but will that be accepted by other post-state authorities, etc.? The answer is there's already regulation, or rather not regulation, there's already recommendations from IMO to use electronic certificates, not paper-based certificates. So again, it's a question of the human problem and understanding and awareness and acceptance, not a technology issue right now.
Okay, thank you, Anjan. In fact, you just took my next question, which was about the certificate. So thank you very much. Now, I did promise everybody that I'd try to end up within an hour, and I think that is important. I've certainly been on webinars that have gone long past. So like I said, we will share this video. Tomorrow you will get an email that will have a CPD or a certificate of attendance that's personalized to you. We let's see, as we end this session, you will have a little questionnaire, and if you could answer those questions to help us improve, I would very much appreciate that. You have Anjan's email and LinkedIn account. You have an email address of the Nautical Institute there on your screen, so please feel free to use that. What am I not forgetting? I think that's about it. So Anjan, it just leaves me to thank you so much. With all these questions that have been flooding in, so many of them are complimentary to your style of teaching, and there are people that you've given eureka moments to, that they finally understand a little bit about what blockchain is, and I know that's the impression that I've had listening to you throughout this exercise. So again, thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the industry. Thank you for sharing it with the Nautical Institute and our members. And I will close the door. Just wish everybody well. And thanks again, and stay safe, everybody. Okay.
Thanks, David. Thanks to the Nautical Institute, and thanks to all the attendees.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Goodbye.